All right. This is Koen. So we have two panels today, both with the same goal, ultimately of decentralization. This one progressively decentralized, so starting from centralized and going to decentralized, and then decentralized from day one, which is kind of like the flip side of this model. So maybe I think just to start off, would like to just to level set the conversation with, why decentralize in the first place, just so people know, understand like why this is it's an important thing to do for projects.
Yeah, I guess I can start. I mean, we found out yesterday why it's important to decentralize, I think. It's not just about governance and community buy-in. I think there's a component which we sometimes forget about, but which we really shouldn't, which is the kind of censorship-resistant component of decentralized finance. And so if we want things that are resistant to regulatory capture, and resistant to all kinds of interference, then they need to be decentralized. If you have some kind of centralized choke point, bad things can happen.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, just to go back to one of the things you said, one of the things that we're experiencing this year is the benefit of decentralization is other people getting involved. We have on Enzyme, we have a bunch of people building and using the contracts that we built as a centralized entity and then sort of released into the world and passed off to a decentralized entity. So those contracts are being used by teams to sort of go their own ways. So I think use cases that we wouldn't have envisioned initially.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'd just like to, if you guys could just describe like the very high level process that you all have been through going from centralized to decentralized. I think both have kind of similar but like different paths to decentralization. So it'd be cool to kind of highlight some of those differences.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. Yeah, so I think with Synthetix, we had an open source software foundation. We had a number of entities that were incorporated in various jurisdictions. And we realized that basically they needed to be wound up. And it wasn't that challenging. It's not that challenging to wind up an entity. You need to make sure you do it right. You need to get, accountants involved and lawyers and all that sort of stuff. But what you hand it over to, I think, is the challenging part, right? So it was like, okay, you have no entities now. What controls this thing? What's the structure of that? And I think that's where splitting the functions, as we did into multiple DAOs, was what kind of helped us. So we took the treasury and we said, okay, this DAO is going to control that treasury. We took, the actual protocol management and we split that into a different DAO. And then we had a public goods funding grants DAO that was also kind of operating, as well as other sort of, governance components. So I think the challenge was not so much in how do you unwind these entities and kind of replace them with something that's decentralized. It's like, what is the thing that is going to be decentralized?
Yeah, I'd like to just level set. I joined Avantgarde, which is the lead maintainer of Enzyme a year and a half ago, and I'm standing in for Mona Elisa, the founder, who couldn't make it over. So everything I'm sort of relaying in terms of the process is part of the lore that I've picked up in my time there, but I have been working under the decentralized sort of governance since I joined. So Melon, the Melonport company was started in Switzerland in 2017, performed an ICO, and was given a mandate basically to spend 2 years building an asset management protocol from scratch on Ethereum with the proceeds of the ICO. So they did so and launched to Mainnet in February 2019. And when they launched, passed off the sort of admin keys for protocol upgrades, treasury spend, that sort of thing, to the then Melon Council, now Enzyme Council DAO. And the process to figure out what that Melon Council looked like was 3 or 4, 5, 6 months of research. And they identified 3 main stakeholder groups. So there's token holders, there's developers, and both of those groups are pretty okay. They're well aligned and incentivized by the price of the token, right? And then the third group is the users. And the users, I think, needed representation in the way that the protocol was governed. So the result was then Melon Council DAO, which is a group of 8 to 10, it varies, but a group of technical users and technical people who can have an opinionated view on the well-being of the protocol. They're responsible for protocol upgrades, they're responsible for tweaking parameters, and they're responsible for spending the treasury. Users are represented by now 2 user representatives. Felix might be here, he's one of them. And they're responsible for sort of aggregating user feedback, overseeing the technical council, and holding them to account. And these are all publicly knowable people who have reputation staked on the line. And yeah, it's worked out pretty well. I think there are a couple steps more to go, but it's good.
So one of the most difficult parts of decentralizing is bootstrapping a committed enough community to actually take the reins, right? So you can say you want to transition to this more decentralized model of governance and operation, but if there's no one that outside the core team that can really step up to take the lead, it's really challenging. So what are some of the ways that you either built the community or gained the confidence in your community that you could start to hand off progressively more of the workload to the community?
Yeah. So I'm a member of Avantgarde Finance. I'm a software developer there, and we are the lead maintainers of Enzyme. And our CEO is Mona, the founder of then the Enzyme Protocol. So this is a step where we were granted a 3-year vesting package of MLN tokens by the council, and with the purpose of continuing to build on and upgrade and maintain the protocol. There are a couple user groups as well who are building stuff alongside for the first couple of years, but we've seen traction pick up alongside us now, where I think that when it comes time to renew the grant next year, it may not be that we're the only people who are applying for this role. So it did take, in this case, we really kept spearheading the development effort, but in doing so, we've sort of widened the scope of who's been involved in the protocol. So you see people like Unslashed and Exponent this year who are building products on it. Unslashed is using it to manage an insurance pool. Exponent's building their own contracts to use it for a sort of, actually I'm not even quite sure it's public, so Unslashed is building stuff on, or Exponent's building stuff on it. And yeah, so we're seeing more people kind of slot in and take over development roles as we've sort of pushed it along.
I think with us, it was a lot of luck and a little bit of skill. We were around early enough that when the crypto winter really kicked in, there weren't that many places to hang out, and the Synthetix Discord was one of them. And I think probably the skill component comes in from, we took an approach very early on of just allowing kind of anything goes, right? So like price discussions, there's multiple channels about price discussions. It's a thing, we accept it. We know people are going to talk about price. And so if you push them out somewhere else, then you're going to lose them, right? So we just took a view that, the Discord is owned by the community. The community can do whatever it wants with it. We're going to be super open. We're going to have places for people to talk about all of the things that they care about. And then I think the timing component was, a lot of those people were kind of DeFi OGs that now have, obviously very high profiles. But at the time when no one cared about DeFi, they were kind of all hanging out in one place.
Yeah. And how gradual was this process? Because it's not easy to transition, in the case where, your token will be worth, say like $1 billion. You'll have hundreds of millions of dollars in TVL. You can't just hand it over in a snap. You kind of have to gradually transition to the community to ensure that this thing can still work while it's happening. So how do you kind of think about and kind of navigate that process?
I'm going to punt on the last part of that question because I wasn't around when they were thinking about it. But the Melon protocol was transferred to the hands of the Melon Council when there was 0 TVL. And there was nothing, it was a protocol that was pushed to mainnet. It was buggy. It wasn't as good as it is now, and it's been an interesting growing process since then. For a little while in crypto winter, we were sitting under $3 million market cap, and we're able to survive because we had a lot of people who believed in the product on the Avantgarde team building the product. So it was a little bit rocky, but I think it's worked out for us. And I think that if we were still in a centralized governance paradigm at the moment, and we're trying to move, I think it'd be a little bit more difficult than it was when nobody had anything staked on the network.
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit more challenging for us because we had a working protocol that we were transitioning, not just transitioning the protocol, but also the governance as well. I think we were also sitting at around like 5 million market cap at the very bottom of the winter, which is funny now when you look back on it. But again, even at those kind of darkest moments or whatever, we still had very engaged people. And so the process of working out how to hand over control of various aspects at different times was, really came down to what are the things that those people are saying they're concerned about, right? And sometimes they were friendly people, sometimes they were total assholes that were on Reddit or whatever, that were complaining about something. But regardless of where the feedback came from, while we had that centralized control, we felt very responsible for listening to someone say, you shouldn't be doing this, or this is wrong, or we need control of this aspect of the protocol. And we looked at that and we just prioritized, and we slowly said, okay, yep, you're right. Like, we shouldn't actually have the ability to do X, we're going to hand it over to you. And so that was kind of the I guess the method that we chose to slowly identify aspects, because it was totally centralized at the beginning, but slowly identify aspects and just pick it apart and get to a point where now I think the Synthetix governance is probably sufficiently decentralized. Let's say that that we are fairly resistant to capture from all kinds of areas, including regulators.
Yeah. So how would you each describe like the current state of decentralization for your project? So, I mean, one of the reasons why this panel is called progressively decentralized is because it's talking about like the journey of decentralization. So, I'd like to hear, where are you today? What are the next milestones you're looking for to continue to progressively decentralize? Kain, we'll start with you.
So I think the main thing is that what we designed our initial kind of architecture to support in terms of upgrades of the protocol is now just not fit for purpose. It really is not able to kind of integrate with all of these components of decentralized governance that we have. And so part of the V3 redesign has been this re-architecting of how governance works. And it's something that I'm really excited about because it's not just going to be a Synthetix thing. We're going to release it as an open source kind of toolkit that people can use to roll out their own protocols or DAOs or whatever. So I think we're pretty far along the decentralized journey, but we're not there in terms of, I guess, efficiency, right? So almost everything is decentralized, but not everything is decentralized in a very efficient manner. And I think that that's something that we could improve, and we're working to improve.
I'm interested to see that those contracts when they come out, because I think it's going to be hugely useful to a lot of people. We're pretty far along, I think, there in terms of decentralization. I don't think there's, in fact, I know there's, the Enzyme Protocol can't be taken down by a single person or entity. I think that we have work to do in terms of responsibilities within governance. So you mentioned, Kain, you've got DAOs that are responsible for treasury allocation and for protocol upgrades and for that sort of thing. I think that that's maybe something we would consider working towards. Yeah, I think that's maybe the thing we'll consider next in terms of where we move.
Yeah, so I think if I could summarize, like, sufficiently decentralized today, but obviously always room to become more decentralized. And I think now you're almost at a stage where it's less about getting to a point where you do get those benefits of decentralization that we desire, such as like resistant to capture and censorship resistant. But now it's about making it a little bit more efficient, right? So, one of the benefits when you were starting centralized is that it's much faster to iterate, right? It's much easier to communicate with your team because it's just a small group of people. But now when you have this massive community, it's much harder to coordinate. It takes much longer to coordinate. So Okay, so what are some of the challenges that you've all run into kind of running these communities at this scale with the current state of decentralization? And what are some of the ways you're thinking about making this way like decentralized governance for these projects more efficient?
Yeah, I can take this first. So every sort of protocol decision runs through the Enzyme Council now, and we've had some growing pains in terms of council members' participation in decision-making process. So we've recently instituted KPIs around that participation on a varying degree of metrics, but I think we can do a better job of holding people accountable who are getting paid by the network to govern it, and that's sort of the big step that we've taken recently.
I think for us, the main thing is that token holders still don't have direct control of the contracts at a level that I guess I would feel comfortable with as a token holder. So we have a lot of delegation, we have a lot of sort of governance components which have control of the protocol, but there is still this sense of discretion, right? Because the token holders can replace those people, but not instantaneously. And so I think that as part of this redesign, this V3 governance structure, token holders will have the ability to halt the protocol, restart it, replace any component of it, and I think that is kind of like until you get to that point, you're really you're not quite like nation state censorship resistant, right? Like that's the level where all of the token holders can kind of coordinate with each other remotely to basically do any of the sort of governance functions you need. You don't want that obviously every day. You don't want every day every single token holder has to be involved in different components. But if, for example, the Spartan Council were all rounded up and thrown in jail or something like that, you want the ability for token holders to step in and say, okay, we're going to replace these people. It's just this component. This component's still working fine. This component's still working fine. We're going to initiate a token vote, replace them all, hold a new election, and you want all of that to be on chain because that's the place that I think that we need to be able to get to be able to say that we are sufficiently decentralized.
Yeah, and I'd love for you guys to speak just a little bit more on kind of like the philosophy around why you design your governance systems this way, because in some cases, like there's certain things that you can kind of mention, like token holders, they don't need to be voting on everything every single day. And if they did, you'd probably get really low voter participation rates. And also, not everyone that owns a token actually knows what they're talking about, right? Kind of just sometimes you just want a number to go up. So, how did you think about what to delegate? Where does it make sense to have almost like elected leaders to make more quick decisions? Just high level design philosophy.
Yeah, I guess I can take this one first. So this was, again, another kind of lucky component, I think, that our governance process started in Discord. So it wasn't an on-chain governance process. And one of the sort of consequences of that was that you actually had one person, one vote in Discord, right? If you had an identity in Discord, you were allowed to vote. You had to establish some kind of credibility in the community. Once you'd done that, you got a vote. And so when we went from this Discord voting system to like a snapshot-like voting system, there was a lot of pushback from the community who basically said, hang on a second, like you've rugged us, now the whales are in control here, what's going on? And so we looked at that and said, you're right, like the community feedback was absolutely right. We went from a much more kind of fair and open governance process to basically a plutocracy overnight, which wasn't the intention. And so we said, okay, how can we find a way to kind of make this process as resistant to plutocracy and whales as possible? And the way that we did it was to allow each person to elect one member of the council. So there's 8 people on the council. You can elect one member, and the whales, even if they were to try and kind of collude, it's still difficult for them to kind of run the entire council the way that it's set up. And this was purely done on the basis of we wanted to have a very diverse council and more widely represent all of the token holders, not just large token holders. And so again, the fact that we started off with one person, one vote, and had to kind of try and get a some sort of replication of that on chain forced us to design it in this way. But I think that it's far more fair than like a direct token voting system like you have in, say, Maker or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, everyone just wants the number to go up, right? And I say that sort of in jest, but the token holders, their interest is in the appreciation and the value of the token. And the people who are making decisions on behalf, or who are making decisions, the council, the Enzyme Council, sorry, who's making decisions about the protocol and about the implementation of the protocol are also compensated in the token, MLN. And their incentives are aligned such that they're going to make decisions that increase the usage of the protocol, which increase the tokens burn, which benefits the token holders. So I think our token being a work token and the council being compensated in it sort of nicely aligns their incentives with both the token holders but also the users of the protocol, because they want users of the protocol to be as, they want it to be as seamless and as easy as possible. So that, again, I can't speak to the philosophy that was being batted around at the table when the system was designed, but those are the consequences that I've seen in practice.
Yeah, and how do you think of like the founding team or the founders' role in these communities as they decentralize, right? So I think on one hand, I think power is very difficult to give up once you have it. I know, Kain, you joked that like you used to be like the former benevolent dictator of Synthetix.
Semi-benevolent. I was never benevolent.
Yeah. But now you're in a place where you kind of do have to give up that power. But at the same time, like these projects, no matter how successful they may be, they're still early, right? And there's still a ton of work to do. So when you think about this baby that you're kind of trying to grow, how do you allow other people to have control or a voice over the project, and kind of what role do you play? Do you take a step back? Do you retire? Do you go work on other things? It's kind of like one of these strange things, I think, in this industry where because you do have to progressively decentralize and you do have to take a step back, in some sense, you could be the core team and you could be a little bit bored after a while because now like so many people are doing things for you. You're not as much in control. You can go work on other things. So just love to hear how you guys think about it's the role of the core team as these communities take control.
Yeah, I mean, well, I've talked about this quite a bit, but I stepped back earlier this year to allow some of these governance structures to emerge and let people find their feet and make sure that I wasn't too loud of a voice in the room, right? There's hard power in the sense of I can press this button and do this thing, and then there's soft power in the sense of if I say this, then people are just going to agree with it, no matter how dumb it is. Now, luckily, within Synthetix, we have a pretty strong norm of ignore whatever Kain says, which is quite good. But even still, there are people that, in the most recent council election, I think I got like 32% of the votes, right? Because people were just YOLO voting for me because they're like, whatever, right? But I do think that that creates issues, the social component of that, right? If you have one very loud voice that's kind of directing everything and it's not being challenged. And so, as I took a step back, a lot of things worked really well, but what didn't work well was the core contributors, all of the people who are paid monthly grants to work on the protocol, their coordination kind of failed, right? Because we didn't have a very good structure or hierarchy of how those people were organizing themselves. And so as soon as I was removed, it was kind of anarchy, right? And people were just running around doing whatever they wanted, and there was not much coordination. And we didn't have a governance framework or mechanism within the protocol to say, this is what we want you to do. So the Spartan Council can say, this is what you're allowed to do, but they can't say, do this today and do that tomorrow. And so what we've done since I've come back is to basically look at creating a governance structure within the core contributors that is the leader of the core contributors without having one person be a dictator. That's not implemented yet. It's about to be implemented, so we'll see if that blows up as well. But we just keep iterating and testing things until we get something that works.
Yeah, again, not a founder, but I can say from experience and observation watching Mona, who is the sort of last remaining member of the founding team, over the last 2 years, it varies based on where the protocol is in its maturity. So we've basically, Avantgarde have taken it from 0 assets under management to 150 million bucks, and she's driven that development. So she certainly hasn't walked away. But we're now seeing an opportunity where other people are being more involved, other teams are being more involved in the development of the protocol, for her, for Avantgarde to, remain the core contributors to the protocol, but also start to look into building other software that can be sort of utilized on top of it. So treasury management services for DAOs, software as a service, that sort of thing. And we can start looking to building an actual business model for a sustainable private company on top of this open source thing, which we built over the last 4 years. So I think it varies by founder, obviously, but in our case, our founder has pushed it to a point where it's now starting to become self-sustainable.
Yeah. And then how do you think about incentivizing these community members to really step up and take the lead? Because on one hand, you could just assume that they own a ton of the tokens and they're just incentivized to see number go up. But you could also have new people that are just getting in 2021 instead of having purchased SNX or Enzyme during the bear market, and they're up like 200x or whatever. So how do you get those people in? What are some ways that you're thinking about setting up compensation packages for these contributors and properly incentivizing them to be leaders in the community?
This is, I think, an opportunity for us to improve. We have a grants committee. The Enzyme Council has a grants committee, and they have made grants to development teams other than Avantgarde Finance. But I think there's a lot of experimentation going on in other protocols. Like Compound is shut down their grants program for a little bit and is now reopening, and and there'll be I think probably like a big postmortem and learnings thing, which I'm very excited to learn about or excited to read, because I think we can use that the experience of other teams to sort of build our own grants program and start thinking about how to be super active in incentivizing people who want to build on the protocol.
Yeah, so I mentioned this before, this idea of like hard power, soft power, right? Within a DeFi protocol that has token-based governance, tokens are hard power. So if you're a whale and you're in the Discord and people know you're a whale, they know that you are going to be able to, exert a reasonable amount of influence on the protocol. But there's also the social component. And so within our Discord, we have people who have no tokens or very few tokens who are pretty high profile. And one of the things that I think we did really well back, I think this is like mid-2018, is we appointed guardians within Discord, and they're basically community moderators. And at the time, there was quite a bit of debate about, do we pay these people? Do we let them do it on a volunteer basis? And we'd been paid, I think we had like paid moderators in there for like 6 months or something like that, and it wasn't working out very well. And I just said, I think we should not pay them. Like, let's let them kind of accrue this social power and see if that's actually something that's worthwhile enough that people will continue to do it. And now I think, 3 years later, there's still several guardians that are still there. They still, do the role. They're in Discord almost every day, and they're not paid anything. Whereas when we launched the council, we wanted it to be a paid role because we really wanted to incentivize those people that that we thought were going to be good council members to join, even if the tokens might not be material to all of them. Some of them are whales, but for a lot of people, I think it was 1,000 tokens a month or something like that. So it's about 120,000 USD a year. It's a meaningful amount of money, especially some people who are in different jurisdictions around the world. So
cool. And last question, just really quick. What advice would you give to communities that are going through or looking to go through a similar process based on your learnings?
Sorry, set metrics for if you go the council route, set metrics for your council and think about it ahead of time.
Get rid of your entities.
All right, thank you.